Roughly 12,000 years ago, during the Neolithic Revolution, human beings stopped wandering and settled down in the Fertile Crescent. For the very first time, our survival depended entirely on a fixed geographical asset, arable land. The moment we tied our lives to a specific piece of dirt, a primal anxiety was born. If you lost control of the land, you lost the surplus. If you lost the surplus, you didn't survive. As centuries bled into millennia and scattered settlements grew into massive global empires, the mechanics of resource control evolved. The ultimate strategic prize shifted from wide-open agricultural fields to the narrow, walled arteries where global wealth actually traveled. When the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II breached the massive Theodosian walls of Constantinople in 1453, he seized absolute control of the primary trade corridor between East and West. By the industrial era, this spatial dominance was completely militarized. European empires fought ruthlessly over constructed waterways to secure their imperial supply lines. The catastrophic casualties of the 1915 Gallipoli campaign, for instance, were driven entirely by the strategic imperative to control the Dardanelles Strait. This map highlights the modern equivalent of those ancient walls. Lying between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, you'll find the Strait of Hormuz. Zooming in on this specific corridor reveals extreme geographic vulnerability. At its narrowest point, the waterway is a mere 39 kilometers wide, and the designated shipping lanes are restricted to just 3 kilometers in either direction. Through this tiny, precarious gap flows roughly 20% of the world's daily oil consumption, amounting to over 20 million barrels a day. The math is entirely unforgiving. Whoever controls the narrowing gates of global trade holds the world's prosperity hostage. It is a deeply rooted geographic reality that breeds an intense psychological paranoia. To understand the explosive 2026 military confrontation between the United States and Iran, we have to look closely at that paranoia. In 1951, a fierce nationalist named Mohammad Mossadegh was elected Prime Minister of Iran. For decades, the British-owned Anglo-Iranian Oil Company had extracted staggering wealth from Iranian oil fields, while remitting a fraction of the profits back to the state. Mossadegh made a globally shocking decision. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, severing British extraction entirely. Mossadegh possessed an acute suspicion of foreign powers, and his behavior baffled foreign diplomats. He often received international dignitaries, including the U.S. ambassador, while lying in bed wearing his pajamas. He even delivered speeches to the Iranian parliament from a bed carried directly into the legislative chambers, frequently bursting into public weeping. The British, unable to resolve the oil dispute and facing an embargo, turned to the United States. Influenced by British intelligence and Cold War anxiety that Mossadegh might align with communist elements, the CIA initiated Operation Ajax in 1953. Operatives engaged in psychological warfare, engineered massive street protests, and financed violent mobs. A jeep rammed the iron gates of Mossadegh's home, forcing the pajama-clad premier to flee out the back door. In the aftermath, the CIA installed a compliant general, coerced the young monarch, and granted him absolute authority. For the United States, Operation Ajax was a swift, inexpensive geopolitical victory. For Iran, the suppression of a popular democratic movement cemented a distinct trauma. It convinced the Iranian people that the West would violently subvert their sovereignty for resource control. It is the original sin of U.S.-Iran relations. Over the next 2 decades, the Shah utilized vast oil wealth to purchase immense quantities of American military hardware, executing a massive modernization campaign. But he was traumatized by his near loss of power in 1953. He developed a deep megalomania and relied on SAVAK, a ruthless domestic security service, to suppress political dissidents. As the Iranian working class grew alienated by the imperial court's extravagance, they found a stark alternative in an exiled cleric, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Khomeini lived an exceptionally frugal, ascetic life, sleeping on the floor and washing his own dishes. To millions of economically marginalized Iranians, his austerity symbolized profound integrity and social justice. By late 1978, the internal contradictions of the Shah's regime broke the country. Following brutal state crackdowns and massive oil worker strikes, the Shah fled. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran. Millions of exuberant citizens flooded the streets to welcome him, rapidly establishing an Islamic republic and converting Iran into America's most dedicated ideological adversary. This ideological divide soon collided with absolute tragedy. In July 1988, during the Tanker War, the U.S. Navy was actively patrolling the Persian Gulf. In a chaotic skirmish, the crew of the highly advanced USS Vincennes drastically misinterpreted their radar data. They fired 2 surface-to-air missiles, shooting down Iran Air Flight 655, a scheduled civilian airliner, killing all 290 people on board. President Ronald Reagan defended the action as a proper defensive measure against a perceived attack. The United States never formally admitted legal culpability. In Tehran, the public categorically rejected the explanation of a technical error. For ordinary Iranians, the shootdown served as irrefutable proof that American military power views their lives as entirely expendable. The weight of these historical grievances culminated in April 2026. By late 2025, Iran had expanded its nuclear program and entrenched its regional proxy networks. The Trump administration, determining that diplomatic avenues were exhausted, set a new objective: the total annihilation of Iran's military and security infrastructure. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a massive surprise attack. Operation Epic Fury opened with a classified precision strike that assassinated the supreme leader. Over the next 38 days, U.S. forces conducted over 10,000 combat sorties, hitting 13,000 targets and obliterating 85% of Iran's defense industrial base. The Iranian Navy was virtually wiped out. While the kinetic force was staggering, combat remained chaotic. The U.S. suffered deadly friendly fire incidents and lethal Iranian drone strikes on base personnel in Kuwait. The assassination didn't destroy the state. It elevated his pragmatic, hardline son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who assumed control from heavily fortified bunkers. The decapitation strategy revealed an immediate limitation. Eradicating the central leadership didn't trigger a total collapse. Highly autonomous proxy militias in Yemen, militant factions in Iraq, and armed forces in Lebanon no longer had centralized restraint, creating an intensely unpredictable regional war network. Facing absolute conventional military disadvantage, Iran deployed its only remaining strategy. They abandoned the skies and targeted the exact geographical vulnerability that terrified the ancient empires. They held the global economy hostage in the seas. They achieved this through what analysts call actuarial warfare. Iran didn't use a traditional naval blockade. Using GPS spoofing and mines, Iran manipulated financial systems, forcing insurers to reclassify the Strait of Hormuz as a war risk zone. Consequently, premiums surged 1,000%, halting 20% of the world's oil supply. U.S. fuel prices spiked instantly. By April 2026, immense pressure forced a temporary ceasefire. Iran faced over $100 billion in economic damage and the threat of systemic collapse. The United States faced a frozen global economy, restless European allies begging for a resolution, and the threat of a prolonged quagmire. The war proved overwhelming kinetic force can shatter defense systems and momentarily pry open a geographic choke point. But hardware alone cannot resolve deeply entrenched historical hostility. As shipping tentatively resumes through the narrow waters of Hormuz, the lesson is clear. Keeping the pathways of human prosperity open requires a profound understanding of the trauma on the other side of the gate.